Okay, we'll call the Public Works, Parks, Rec, and Railroad Committee to order. First thing, we need a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Motion by Supervisor Gerard, seconded by Supervisor Merlino. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, carried. Okay, our first thing on the agenda is a proposal to pave add-grade platform in Stony Creek. Justin Gagnon will speak on this.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, press release went out earlier this week for our Train to Christmastown, which we will be offering at a Stony Creek Ranch. As part of that move of location for our holiday trains, there are several upgrades that need to be done to that location to make it suitable to hold such a large event. We're hoping to get as many as 36,000 passengers for the Train to Christmastown. One of those upgrades is an at-grade platform which would be built along the east side of the tracks at Stony Creek Ranch. It would be built within the right-of-way. We would use various types of aggregates, crushed stone to get up to the level, and then it would be paved from there with a railing on the slope side for safety. I've spoken with Jeff. He's told me some of the information that he is going to need to make sure that the design meets county expectations. I've pulled most of that together so far, and I told him I would get him the rest of it by close of business. What I'm looking for right now is basically approval of the concept of the construction of the platform. It would be an enhancement to the county property.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Anybody want to move that? Supervisor Gerard, second. Supervisor Merlino.
We just get a question, Chairman. Just the supervisors that live in that area, what like it, don't like it?
Yeah, great.
If we, go ahead, Claudia.
Jeff, can you speak to this?
Sure, I have talked to Justin here in the last couple days, and as he mentioned, I talked to him about some of the details we would need. Essentially, the platform would involve a lot of fill material adjacent to the tracks. In the area that runs near the Stony Creek Ranch, the track is actually elevated probably 4 or 5 feet near the southern end of where this platform would go. It's elevated about 4 or 5 feet above the adjacent grade, so the tracks and the ballast for the tracks are built on an elevated filled area. So the details we'd want to see would be the typical sections that would show the drainage away from the tracks for the platform, and then also whatever treatments on the slope side to make sure the slope is stable but also safe, so that pedestrians, it's not a tumble hazard for pedestrians or even wheelchairs and other things. So those are the details that we'd be asking Justin to provide, and then we'd provide some engineering oversight. So I'm okay with, I don't have any concerns with the proposal, and we would just make it contingent on my final approval, and I can certainly send details as I get them out to the committee if you wish.
Claudia?
Is there any way to do it just as a wooden platform kind of thing rather than a paved structure?
That's certainly possible. It would be quite a structure. They're asking for a platform that's 750 feet long and 12 feet wide. So I think the concept they're proposing is going to essentially be earth fill or aggregate fill to bring those areas up to grade at the track level, and then paving it. And their intent is to be able to load passengers over a length of the train rather than into a single car.
Yeah, the cost difference between building a wooden platform that long versus bringing in fill and paving would be substantially different.
What would you estimate that your cost would be?
For our proposal for the aggregate, it would be around $40,000. Probably not. There's sources, suitable sources closer by.
Okay, Chairman?
Yeah, unless you have some comment or question, more comment, and that is just the timing on this. I mean, it seems like this, I don't have any specific objection. I'm just curious about the timing.
The timing of this is directly involved with the signing of the MOU with Stony Creek Ranch, which happened last Friday. And then the press release came out on Tuesday, so everything had to follow the signing of that MOU.
So when we do anticipate you would start construction?
As soon as DPW approves the design.
Okay, is there any further questions from the committee? Not, I'll call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a presentation regarding the storage of rail cars. Mr. Ed Ellis.
Tickets are available at www.sncrr.com, and I hope everybody's here with tickets for themselves, wives, kids, grandma, grandpa on Train to Christmastown at Stony Creek. First time that the Christmas train has run out of Warren County since we started, and we're really pleased to be able to work with the new owners of 1,000 Acres in helping them develop tourism in this part of Warren County. We're really excited about being able to offer this, and I'm particularly excited about it because we've done Train to Christmastown in some locations every year for the last 5 years. This is the first time we've done it in 6 locations, and the book was written by my wife, so I hope you'll buy a copy of the book as well. Buy several copies of the book. I still have kids in college, so buy several copies of the book. Thanks for inviting me, Matt, and members of DPW committee. Just want to go back in time a little bit and hit a few historical highlights. Came here to this room in the fall of 2010. We were one of 3 bidders to operate the rail line. The committee selected us, and we began operations in July of 2011. We took on a substantial financial burden of maintaining the track, the bridges, the culverts, the station platforms, the parking lots, the station platforms and parking lots that you don't own in Saratoga Springs. And we've worked as your partner and also as the partner of the town of Corinth. Supervisor Lucia is here from the town of Corinth. It's been a terrific 3-way partnership. We've brought one of the finest trains in North America to the Saratoga North Creek, and we've handled hundreds of thousands of people. It hasn't been easy. We've had some difficult years. Last year, 2017, was a difficult year. We got started late, partly because of the contract renewal process, which I'll talk about in a second. But we're expecting this year Christmas to be good. We're planning to run a winter train. I'm not calling it a snow train because every time I use the word snow, it doesn't. So we're going to call it a winter train. And we have plans for improved dinner train service next year as well. So when we got to 2015, it became obvious to me that a lot of rail cars were going to go into storage, and I came to this committee in June of 2015 and made a presentation on storage of hazardous tank cars, hazardous in the sense that they had residue in them, and let everybody know that the railroad needed an additional revenue source in order to fund the continued maintenance of the track, and it looked like car storage was an excellent source of that additional revenue. There was a lot of discussion about it. The committee appointed a group to discuss the contract with us, and ultimately we got to March of 2016 with really no changes to the contract, and came to the full board in this room to talk about the contract renewal. It was kind of an interesting meeting. It got tabled, it got untabled. I don't know if you've gone back and reread those minutes, but it'd make a great miniseries, I think. So at the after it was untabled, I stood at this podium and answered questions about car storage for an hour. And as part of that, I made a commitment, personal commitment, not to store hazardous cars on our line up to Haas. At the same time, I did say that it was my goal to continue working on getting cars to store there, and that we would continue to do that. So the board approved renewal of the contract with the full knowledge that it was our intent to continue to seek car storage. It took a while. We've been working hard on it. We have 57 car storage customers. They range in size from the largest owner of rail cars in North America, which is Wells Fargo. You would have thought they were only into stagecoaches, but they've expanded. And we also have some very small customers. I think Coors Brewing has 20 cars in storage. They're one of our smallest customers. So in every time my car storage business manager would call me to say, I have somebody that's interested in storing cars, my question to him was, are they interested in Saratoga, North Creek? Because it's very easy for us to store cars in Mississippi. We interchange with 5 railroads at Memphis. It's very easy for us to store cars in Colorado because we're on the main route of all the coal trains and oil trains in the world. So when they're empty, it's pretty easy for them to bring them to Colorado. But over on the East Coast, it's harder to find cars because people who own cars want them to be nearer to the use that they're going to be put to next, and almost all of those loading locations are west of Chicago. So getting customers to be interested in bringing cars to Saratoga, North Creek was a huge challenge, and we worked very hard on it. So last month, Justin was able to report to this group that we have finally achieved some success, and we do have actually one of the largest companies, Union Tank Car, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, one of the most reputable railcar firms in the world, is moving some clean cars, not hazardous, to Saratoga and North Creek. So what does that mean for the company, and what does it mean for the county? Well, it means that we have begun to achieve a modicum of support for the money that we spend on the track. The town of Corinth owns about half of the track. Warren County owns the other half of the track. We bought track beyond the two counties' track up to Haas. We did that actually pretty soon after we started operating the railroad. National Lead owned it, and they were, Haas had been shut down for a long time, as you all know, and they were trying to divest themselves of the assets. So with Essex County's help on some tax issues, we were able to purchase that line. We did come to the county at that time and ask if the county wanted to own it, because it would be, since we had a publicly owned line, a fully publicly owned line might have made some sense, but most of the line is in Essex County, and I don't think Essex County wanted to participate, so it ended up that we bought the line. And we have worked diligently to try to move stone out of Haas. We moved a little stone. It's not that we haven't moved any. We actually leased some cars. We've had them for almost 4 years now for the purpose of moving stone out of Haas, and I think we moved maybe 20 or 30,000 tons. We were hoping to move 1 million tons, so we obviously didn't get as much of it as we would have liked, but we haven't given up on that. We think that there is ultimately a market for the stone. We think it's, in England, They would call this recycled stone because it was mined or quarried for some other reason. It wasn't, it was waste, basically, in the titanium process that they had at Tahaz. So the 100 million tons of stone that are on the ground at Tahaz has already been quarried, and we think its time will come. It's good quality stone. The negative of that stone is the iron content, which makes it a little heavier, and that means that if you need a ton of limestone, you need 1.1 tons of Tahaz stone, or you need 0.9 tons of Tahaz stone to equal the same amount. So if you're trying to spread it over a specific area, it takes more stone, more weight of stone than it does for regular limestone. So that's the disadvantage, but we think there will ultimately be a huge cost advantage, and we're doing our best to keep the whole railroad alive in order to be able to move that waste stone at some point for everybody's benefit. And so what does it cost to maintain a railroad? Well, you know, a good rule of thumb that you could find on a number of websites is $10,000 a mile a year. So there's 60 miles between Saratoga and North Creek. That's $600,000. We've actually spent more than that since we started as your contractor. That would be about $3.6 million over 6 years, and we're closer to $5.5 million right now that we spent on the railroad. So because the railroad wasn't able to develop freight, and because the passenger operation hasn't developed as well as we'd like, a lot of that $6.6 million has come from the parent company, and that's been a lot for the parent company to swallow. It's meant that we've had challenges paying vendors, and we've had challenges, you know, getting equipment that we would like to have. But you know, sunshine on the horizon. We found somebody to come in and put cars onto the line that will provide a base level of revenue to allow us to maintain the track, pay our vendors, and continue operating the passenger trains on your railroad and Supervisor Lucia's railroad. So I was surprised by the Finance Committee's action, and I asked for a meeting, which was granted with, I think, Mr. Conover, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Garrity, and Mary, the new Brian. It says Brian there. You don't look anything like Brian. And what surprised me was that there was some surprise about this, because, and I thought maybe I dreamed that I went to the meeting where the contract was approved, because I knew that I had stood here and answered questions about railcar storage for a long time. So I actually went back and watched the video, and I was a lot fatter than I am now. That's the one takeaway I had from the video. But sure enough, I made it very clear that, number one, I couldn't change the contract to take the movement of cars out. Number two, I personally committed to not storing any hazardous cars. And number three, I let everybody know that we were going to continue to work to find cars. And so the way I look at it at this point is this is a very positive development for the town of Corinth, for Warren County, and SNC, and for the parent of SNC, Iowa Pacific, because we have a toehold. Not nearly enough. I think we have, at this moment, a commitment for 100 cars. We have room up there for probably close to 2,000 cars. If we had 2,000 cars, the entire maintenance budget of the railroad for a year, every year, would be paid for by those cars. So we're thrilled to have gotten a highly reputable company to store non-hazardous cars on a railroad that very much needs the financial support. And so today here, I'm hoping that you guys, as the Public Works Committee, the group that is responsible for the railroad, will support me in this. So Matt, I'd be happy to answer questions that any supervisor has.
Mr. Dickinson?
Well, they really can't be abandoned. Well, I mean, if we were dealing with a disreputable company, I suppose they could, you know, go bankrupt. And if they did, then the court would decide what would be done with the cars. I mean, we actually had a customer go bankrupt. We had a customer that had oil cars stored in Colorado, went bankrupt, and the cars were then auctioned to another company, who then continued to store them with us for a while and ultimately took them somewhere else, cleaned them, and put them in a different kind of service. So a rail car, there's about 1,750,000 rail cars in North America. They're all pretty fungible. You can use them anywhere. They interchange and roll on anybody's tracks to anywhere, and some of them are for a very specific kind of service. I mean, you don't use coal cars to haul liquid, but in every case, a car that is sitting on a rail somewhere, something is going to happen to that. And if its useful life is over, then the owner of that car is going to send it to a scrapyard and turn it back into razor blades, or turn it back into some other kind of railroad car. We actually had some lumber cars that were sold for scrap, and they kept the wheels and axles and other parts of the car, and those went into construction of other new cars. So because the parts are all pretty much interchangeable as well. So if you were a car owner and you called me up and said, I wanted to store some cars, our car storage guy would put together an agreement with you that specified what the terms were, how long you could store them, how much you would pay us for them, what if something went wrong with the car and it had to be fixed, who was responsible for that, and you know, we have agreements with 57 separate companies. Some of them are what I would call short-term agreements. They're cancelable on 30 days notice. Some are what we call take-or-pay agreements, which means that they have to pay us whether the cars show up or not. Some are evergreen contracts, which continue indefinitely unless one party decides to terminate it. Some have a specific ending date. But the guy who handles this for me is also my real estate guy, and he's very experienced at both negotiating and contracts. And the only thing I ever say to him is when he calls me and says, I have such and such a customer for this many cars at this many dollars a day, I say, can't you get another 25 cents out of that? That's the only thing I ever say to him.
Are any of these cars stored?
No, none of the cars would be stored in Warren County. They're simply going across the Warren County track and going across the town of Corinth track to get to the Warren County track. No, absolutely. That was the whole point of the discussion we had around the renewal of the contract. Was what, you know, it was our position, and still is, that even if the cars were hazardous, which these are not, that we don't need your permission to go across the track. But I committed to you that we wouldn't move any hazardous cars into storage across your track, and we haven't. But no, we have all the rights in the world to move the cars across the track. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for your support because there are some other people, not you, but there are some other people on the county board who think that they should tell us that they are opposed to us moving these cars across the track. And so the reason that's important for me to get your support is because if the board of supervisors passes a resolution like that opposing it, it's going to hurt me with our car storage customers. It's possible that even the UTLX will say, gee, we don't want to get into the middle of a political football. And so we could have substantial financial harm from Warren County taking that position. And I went to the other partner, I went to Supervisor Lucia, and I asked him to find out what the position of the town of Corinth would be. And of course Dick can speak for himself, but they had a town meeting, and I don't believe there was any objection. There was no objection from the town of Corinth. your partner in this venture. So I'm just hoping that we can either not have a resolution or have a resolution that says, thank you, Mr. Ellis, for spending $5.5 million to maintain our asset, and and hope you can get some of it back from the cars that you told us you were going to be seeking when we renewed your contract.
So what do you
They read the paper. I'm going to tell you, UTLX are great guys. The company's based in Chicago. It's a few blocks from my office. I walk over there and see them on a pretty regular basis because we have a lot of cars with them in other places. And because of the Warren Buffett connection, they are pretty sensitive to, what the public thinks. And, of course, in this situation, I made a commitment that I wouldn't store any hazardous cars. They were one of the companies that would have stored hazardous cars up here had we been willing to do that, and we had to tell them no. We said that we could only take clean cars. We could not take hazardous cars. So we've already foregone a substantial amount of revenue, I would say in 7 figures, from me saying that we wouldn't do it. And I think in this case, we want to welcome UTLX with open arms for supporting our railroad.
Thank you, sir.
Claudia?
Did you? Mr. Ellis, Claudia Bramer, I'm from Glens Falls, and I am opposed to you storing rail cars in the Adirondack Park. The Adirondack Park is a pristine area of the state where we have dedicated to protecting that environment. It's based in our Constitution, over 100 years old. The Adirondack Park is something unique to New York State. It's unique to the country, and arguably it's unique to the world. I do not want to stand here as a member of the Board of Supervisors and not put on record that we are opposed to storing junk cars in the Adirondack Park.
Whoa.
I'm not going
There's
to.
no junk car being stored.
That's my term. That is my term. Please do not interrupt me while I'm speaking. I have the floor.
We have a contract, and that's a misrepresentation.
Go ahead, Claudia.
Thank you. I will revise my statement. You are storing cars that have no further use at this time, correct?
I'm storing cars that are not needed right now. That doesn't mean they have no further use. That would be a misrepresentation as well.
You have put in your response to the county's questions that you hope they are in storage for as long as possible to provide financial support for maintaining the line. Okay, so they'll be there indefinitely.
I hope so.
Correct. And you've also just stated to us that you have room for 2,000 cars. I would like you to please indicate where they are. If they're not in Warren County, where are they?
Between, on the line to Haas, we have room for 2,000 cars.
On the main line.
On the main line.
And have you submitted that plan to the Department of Environmental Conservation?
No.
Have you submitted any plan to the Adirondack Park Agency?
No, this is a federally certified railroad, and any use of the tracks for car storage like that preempts either of those agencies, so it isn't necessary.
And there are currently more than 20 cars stored alongside the Hudson River outside of North Creek. Some are painted with graffiti, and are these going to be moved?
I don't have any information on that.
Okay. Some that are parked along the Boreas River on the Sanford Lake line are falling apart and have paint chips falling on the ground.
Those cars we inherited from you. Those cars do not belong to us. They were on the railroad when we got the railroad, and we moved them out of the way. So we don't know, until you guys tell us what to do with those cars. They're just going to sit there.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I have a comment for the board. I know most of the board is here, not everybody, but he stated to us earlier that the parent company is subsidizing this particular line, Saratoga North Creek, and that they have other places to store these. cars. So if the parent company needs to recoup its money, I see no reason why they can't store them elsewhere on the other various lines that they have available to them.
May I answer that? They're full. We have filled up everything else. This is the only one that's left. That's why we can't store them somewhere else, because this is the last one. And I should also add that, and this is an update, were you on the board when we approved the contract, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
I opposed it.
Okay. So when we were going through the contract, coal cars were starting to move into storage. What has happened since then is that 1 out of every 5 coal-fired power plants in North America has shut down. That means that basically 1 out of 5 rail cars, or about 75,000 coal cars, are in storage now. A lot of those cars are in storage on the 2 main western railroads, BNSF and UP. In fact, both of them have taken hundreds of miles of main track out of service to store these cars because they're obligated to, because the cars are not owned by them, they're owned by a leasing company. They're owned by somebody like Wells Fargo. And so until those leases are up, they can't return them to Wells Fargo or whomever. So when those leases are up, Wells Fargo and all the other leasing companies will be looking for a place to store 75,000 more cars. That's 7,500 miles of cars. So the little 30 miles that we have, that we own in Essex County, is a tiny little piece of what's going to be needed. And so somebody could logically ask, well, why don't they just cut those cars up, they're aluminum, make them into beer cans? And the answer is because the current mood of the President and Congress is that we're not done with coal, we want to figure out how to revive it, and none of the leasing companies are going to cut up a car if it's possible that it's going to be needed. The scrap price of the car is a fraction of what they have invested in the car. So the leasing companies are telling me that that decision won't be made for 10 years. So during that period of time, some bright, shiny aluminum cars may very well show up here, as well as whatever we have coming right now. And I do want to be clear about it. This is something that was the time to have made this change was when the contract was renewed, because once the contract was renewed, we were committed at that point by signing the renewed contract to continuing to invest in this railroad, which we have done. And so I think if, ma'am, if you want us to not store cars in the Adirondacks, there should be reasonable compensation to us for agreeing not to do that.
Dennis? Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming in today, Ed.
Sure.
I appreciate that. Doug Beatty from Queensbury. We are partners. I get that, Dennis. I'm concerned that partners pay late bills. Usually partners don't do that. So that concerns me, I'll be honest with you. We've paid late on numerous occasions.
Absolutely.
And that's a very big concern of mine. I also look at Warren County as a partner in the Adirondacks. To our friends to the north, Essex County, Hamilton County, and so forth. And I understand you needing to be business viable. I get that part. I guess if you came to us, or me, with almost anything else, I'd probably say, hey, Ed, let's do it because I want you to succeed. Because as you succeed, we succeed. But personally, I have a real tough time knowing that we could potentially have 2,000 cars in the Adirondacks. And I totally agree with Ms. Bramer in the sense that we think we have something special up here. Maybe you don't, and I think you do because you're a good man. We think we have something real special up here in the Adirondacks. And personally, if we had 100 or 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 cars, someone will have graffiti. That's just the nature of the beast today. Lining the tracks up in Essex County. I just can't get by that as something that I can support. Come to me with something else you want to do to make money, and I'll probably be behind that. But this one, I just can't.
I said this to Supervisor Conover. You're right that we've been late paying bills. It was a bad year. It's kind of like I broke my leg. So now you guys want to cut off my other leg, make it harder for me to pay bills. This is a way to make it easier for me to pay bills. We have something special in the Adirondacks. I agree with you. We have something special in Colorado. We have something special in Mississippi. If Larry Hart, the chairman of the North Central Mississippi Regional Rail Authority, was here in this room, he would tell you that the northern Mississippi forests are special. There are some beautiful lakes. There's a lot of great fishing. His email address is crappie2000. And he would say that it's pretty special, and he welcomes the storage cars in spite of the fact that they're right next to Highway 51 all the way from Grenada to Canton. And when you drive down Highway 51, you can see them. If we were in Colorado and Darius Allen, the chairman of Alamosa County, one of our partners there, they own and rebuilt the depot in Alamosa, he would say, you know what, the San Luis Valley is something special. It's the largest alpine valley in the world, 100 miles long, 75 miles wide, it's 7,500 feet. You can see it from outer space. That's why there's so many alien landing sites in the San Luis Valley. They can find it. And you can see the Sangre de Cristos to the east. You can see the San Juans to the west. And you can see a line of thousands of storage cars along US 160. And he's happy that they're there because they are preserving that railroad and keeping it in operation. You know what's different about the Adirondacks? There is no Highway 51. There is no Highway 160. The only way you're going to see those cars is if you trespass on our tracks, because our tracks are in the middle of nowhere up in the Adirondacks. They are hidden from view. There's nobody who loves the Adirondacks who will go up there and say, oh my God, look at this. Here's 1,000 cars in plain view, because they won't be in plain view. We've done our best to keep them out of people's view because we're sensitive to the view. We understand. I mean, I love the Adirondacks too. I was coming here before it was a railroad. That's just one of the things that attracted me to being your contractor was I love this part of New York. So we're not, you don't see any cars unless you trespass on our tracks, walk down the tracks, and take a picture. That's the only way you would see it. And that will continue to be the case. We're not planning to put a bunch of cars right out there where people can see them. The cars that we have stored just north of the depot, and the hopper cars that we have in Corinth are cars that are theoretically usable by us. The hopper cars are going back. I guess by the end of this year, Justin, is wherever the leasing company wants them. And the passenger cars that are either ours or that we inherited from you were left here when the railroad was handed to us are not something that we brought in. The cars that we bring in, the Union Tank Car cars that we bring in, will not be visible to you or to anyone.
Thank you. Just one more follow-up. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a very good answer.
Sure.
And again, perception becomes reality. I don't think anybody will see the cars, but the perception is that we're storing cars in the Adirondacks. 1 out of 8 jobs is tourist related, okay? So you're talking about our livelihood to a large degree to thousands of people.
I agree.
And I've been in business a long time too, as well as you, and perception becomes a reality. And if the perception gets out there that the Adirondacks is tainted, if we have our lakes aren't as clear, that's why we fight and spend thousands of dollars on invasive species. If the perception if the perception gets out there that we are less than pristine, then the reality is we lose people coming up here. They will seek other avenues to come up. I probably agree with you. Probably nobody will ever see those cars. But the fact of the matter is, if people think there's thousands of painted cars in this pristine Adirondacks, they think twice maybe about coming up here. And I know that's a stretch, but I believe that. And I know Dennis probably won't, but
protect people to thank for that, because they're the ones that are saying that. It's not true. They're not derelict. They're not tainted. There's nothing wrong with these cars. They're a big hunk of metal. There's a railroad track that goes through there, and it's a car parked on a railroad track. Even the Post-Star, which hasn't always been our friend, although, Don's done his best, editorialized and said, good grief, let him park the car.
I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Rachel, Ron, and then Matt, and Claudia.
Mr. Chairman. My name is Rachel Seaver. I represent Queens Area as an at-large supervisor. And I do appreciate you coming, but I think, you previously referred to some of our county meetings that they've reached the level of a mini-series, but I'm very pleased to see the interaction, the discussion, the public
Yeah, me too.
I think that just shows that as a community, we're all very interested in what happens. The good partner, which we talked about today, I too have had concerns with not being paid, even after the renewal discussion, where it didn't take that long, and the violations to the contract. Those are significant concerns. But this morning, what bothers me a little bit is that we heard from Supervisor Dickinson ask you about Essex County. What I didn't hear you say, and I'd like to know if you're aware of it, was their October 2nd resolution, number 297, where they passed a resolution saying that they are opposed to stores as well. And, I heard you say they care about what the public thinks, but were you aware of their resolution?
No.
So you don't have a copy, you didn't know they passed an opposing resolution?
No, first I've heard of it.
So that was sent out to us this morning by our chairman, and they did pass a resolution not supporting the storage as well. So just,
I would point out that they're not our partner in this. They're not a signatory to a contract. They did not induce us to come back and sign a contract based on the fact that we said we were going to store cars. So they're not in this chain. Corinth is in the chain, and you're in the chain, and I'm in the chain. Essex helped us get the line, helped us tax it, but they did not participate in it in any way. So if in their situation, it's not the same situation, because if I'm Union Tank Car and I call up Ed and say Essex County, I say Essex County is not a party to the contract. It's between you and Supervisor Lucia and us.
Well, I appreciate your comments. However, I would support the resolution in front of us. And Mr. Ellis, just to the point of, I think our community, we're partners in this together. And I think we've heard loud and clear from a lot of members in our community that they are opposed to this and very concerned about it.
So I think if you want me to not store the cars, then we need to talk about reasonable compensation, because this is a very important revenue stream, and you will, passing a resolution, very likely cost the company 7 figures.
Well, I'd like to hear from our attorneys at the appropriate point, Mr. Chairman, regarding that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ron?
Hi, it's Ron Montesi. I just have a technical question. I think it is our obligation to adhere to the contract that we have.
Right.
That's my priority. The question that I have is, how do you clean the car? I'm just curious, how does that process take?
Yeah, so first, if you're talking about cleaning a tank car, you have to be a certified tank car cleaning facility, which means that you have to have the kind of facilities that will allow whatever comes out of the car to be captured and properly disposed of or recycled. You have to have proper training for the people who are involved in doing the cleaning, and you have to have the proper safety equipment so that they don't get hurt, because they'll be working in a confined space inside a railroad. Generally, they steam clean them. And so they heat up whatever is in the car hot enough that it will flows out the bottom, then they power wash whatever is left, and when it's finished, an inspector comes in and looks to make sure that all the residue is gone before the car is certified as clean. So Union Tank Car, UTLX, not only cleans cars, they build cars, they rebuild cars, they have facilities all over the country where they do that and that are all certified, which means they're inspected by all the appropriate federal agencies, OSHA, FRA, PHMSA, and so the product that they turn out is top notch. So if they say a car is clean, the car is clean. I don't want to do that myself either. I want to be crawling around in a tank car.
Earlier, I think it was Supervisor Dickinson who mentioned, who brought up something about bankruptcy. If a rail car company goes bankrupt, or maybe it was you that mentioned it, and what happens to those cars. I have a similar question, but it's more or less, if this rail line is not very successful, it's not very viable, you know, I understand there's a lot of business, there's reasons for it, but let's just assume maybe things aren't going to work out and the parent company says, all right, we're done here. Pulls up the whole operation, and you have been able to get capacity of storage cars. You have 2,000 cars up there. What happens then? Is this contract transferable? And if that contract is transferable, what happens with those lease agreements? And if somebody comes in to take over those lease agreements, are they going to ignore that handshake agreement that you gave us without wanting to store
Yeah, that's a good
chemical cars?
question. It was actually not even a handshake, it was just oral.
Right.
So,
but the spirit of
yeah, so let's unpack that one. Okay, so number one, what happens if we just walk away from it? Well, we would, if we knew we were gonna walk away from it, we would call up whoever had cars stored and say, we're walking away from it, we're terminating your contract, you have to get them out. I mean, we wouldn't leave them behind. We ended a contract on another railroad this year in North Carolina, and we had cars stored there, and that's exactly what we did. We terminated the contract, and we said to the company, you know, we'll no longer be operating the railroad after X date. Contract's terminated, cars have to be moved out. So that's what we would do. Let's just say that, you know, it gets taken out of my hands, and you guys don't renew the contract at the end of 4 years, and we would do the same thing, unless there was another company that you appointed and you wanted them to continue, and we had a handoff, and they said, yeah, leave the cars in storage, we'll take care of them. You know, we all agreed to that, and you know, if they're providing financial support for us, they would provide financial support for someone else. So that would be a good thing. You know, if we went bankrupt, the Surface Transportation Board handles railroad bankruptcies. USDOT appoints a trustee. USDOT would come in with the trustee, and the trustee would say, there's storage cars here, what do we do with them? So it would get resolved by a federally appointed trustee. So there's not a situation in which the cars would just be abandoned by us or anyone else. There have been situations where some non-railroad went bankrupt, and there were storage cars on a spur line, and it got hard to get them out. Our line in Mississippi is connected to a line at Durant, goes from Aberdeen Junction to Kosciuszko, and those guys went bankrupt, and it ended up that a contractor came in and moved the cars out and sent them somewhere else. It was owned by the state hired a contractor, the contractor came in and did it. But there's no, I cannot imagine a situation, I do not know of a situation that has ever existed, ever, where cars went into storage and got abandoned in place and just left there. Except when we took over the railroad, and there were a bunch of old derelict passenger cars that had been brought in, I guess, by the Regals or whoever the previous operator was. Those were still there when we got here, and nobody made any kind of agreement. We've tried to get the owners of those cars to do something with them, and we've had no luck, and we would certainly welcome if you guys, you know, want us, whatever you want us to do with those cars, we're happy. If you want us to cut them up, we'll do whatever you want us to do with those cars.
I appreciate that's a thorough answer, but is that contract transferable? Can it be
The
purchased?
storage contract or our contract?
That contract that you have with us?
No,
Okay.
not without your permission. I suppose with your permission it would be transferable. I mean, we could make an agreement to do anything, but it's not
Okay.
transferable by us without approval of the town of Corinth and you.
Okay. Now, and thank you for answering that. You know, I understand the spirit of partnership, and I want to see that partnership succeed. I wasn't on the board in 2010, but I was on the board in 2016 when we renewed the contract. I was critical, but I was learning a lot about that specific partnership that existed, and I had a lot of faith in my peers. So I trust their judgment on that. But at the end of the day, my tenure on the board so far, I haven't seen a great mutual partnership. I understand there's difficulties, but when it comes to the Adirondack Park, even though they're not going to be stored in Warren County per se, I mean, I'm from Glens Falls, represent Glens Falls, but most of Warren County is in the Adirondack Park, and the Adirondack Park in itself is one community. And while we have a partnership, this Board of Supervisors has a partnership with those other communities, and that's 100,000 people we have partnerships with. And we need to listen to those people and their concerns.
As I said, and will continue to say, I am willing to make a deal to not store the cars for reasonable compensation.
I
You know,
appreciate that,
this is how we become. It takes money to be a better partner. It's one thing that we've been short of, and this is a solution. It's not necessarily the only solution. You know, certainly if I could come up with something else to bring to you that I thought was going to generate the same kind of money, I would. But the 3,500 cars in Mississippi are providing match money for a $7.5 million federal grant to improve the railroad, and they're thrilled about that. So, and they're contributing too. They're contributing match money as well. So there are other solutions besides just storing cars, but storing cars is something we were committed to do, and we told you we were going to do it, and we've continued to tell you as the process has gone on. And so if there's some other way to compensate us instead of storing cars because you would prefer for us not to do it, I'm willing to amend the contract and not do storage for reasonable compensation.
Thank you for your answer.
Claudia, and you, Dennis.
Thanks. I just want to echo, I mean, I know other supervisors have already said it, that we represent a lot of people. I've been going around talking to a lot of people trying to make sure that I understand public sentiment and gauging that, and I've gone up to Thurman, met with people there. I've talked to people in Johnsburg, and we have diverse views on a lot of different things, but this one, people are on the same page. They do not want this. And I hear what you're saying about some sort of, you know, payment to you so that you don't do this, but right now we have no contractual obligation to do that. There is nothing.
And I have no
I'm not
contractual
saying we
obligation
couldn't
not
look
to
at
move the
something
cars.
like that.
I have the absolute ability to move and store the cars.
I understand your position is you don't need our approval. There's nothing also stopping us from saying that we do not oppose this idea and following the lead of Essex County, who already passed a resolution, and they're going to be in their county. The other thing that I just want to, I don't agree with you that they're not going to be visible. They're going to be visible all the way up to Essex County, and there are people that I talked to this week who are rafting guides, and they see them. They see them while they're on the river. So and there are portions in Essex County that you do not own the fee to. Those are privately owned pieces of land. So people who own this and have the railroad in their backyard are going to be able to see them. That's all I have. Thank you.
I should just add to that you know, the difference between Essex County and Warren County is that the customers know that Warren County is a signatory to the contract, and that's where the financial harm comes from. If one of our customers says, look, one of the signers to your contract has opposed what you're doing, I'm not going to store the cars there. That's financial harm to us. And if you had not approved the contract 2 years ago, if you had said at that time, no car storage, we're not signing the contract, I would not have incurred the cost of running this railroad since the contract was renewed. So, but you did approve it. You didn't vote for it, but it was approved. Yeah, 100% of our employees are in the tourism business. 100%.
I've had a lot of partnerships. I've had over 10,000 partners. This point, they have been late. We offer the word every extra one time they will take. That's why their right to operate their business as they're legally allowed to. I don't understand. Do not get it.
Cynthia?
Yes, Cynthia High, Town of Thurman.
Hello.
I'm opposed to the idea of storing a rail car, and I disagree with your comment that nobody will see them. I'd like to call your attention to a small airfield in the town of Johnsburg, the hamlet of North Creek, where a very favorite pastime is to take a ride with a local pilot. And I believe that those people will see a great big eyesore when they're flying around the Adirondack Mountains. And the people in the town of Thurman, who I have spoken to, are in opposition to this. One of them is a rafting guide.
So for reasonable compensation, we can amend the contract and we won't do it. But I can tell you that in Colorado, when you drive down Highway 160, you can see miles and miles of cars. And I actually got a commendation from the Wildlife Department because having the cars next to the road actually reduced the number of deer and elk that were hit by cars in the winter. We left gaps in the cars for the deer and elk to go through at various places, and they figured out that mostly they needed to go this way and that way, and they told me that the kill count on deer and elk in the wintertime was down by 60%. It's nice to hear that.
Sokol?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Sokol, Town of Kingsbury, and I'm also the finance chair. I hope possibly for the right reason.
I did. Thank you for asking. Thank you.
So we did pass a resolution at the last meeting, and quite honestly, I wish we invited you because there were
If I had,
questions
I
that,
would have been happy to come.
that this has been very helpful to answer a lot of questions on my part. Unfortunately, people, I think we have a black and white situation here. We have a contract, and maybe Mary needs to speak to this. We've been talking about an hour for an hour already about cars, but it's not our choice. And quite honestly, if I don't like eyesores myself, but I understand this. We here at the county try to cut expenses as much as we can. We cut it to the bone, but yet we also try to understand how to make revenues, to try to lower our tax base. So I guess Ed is trying to do the same thing here with his business. And do we want a business to fail? Do we have to compensate him? I guess, Mary, if you can interject something here, we're in a situation right now where I don't think we have a choice, and I think we're bound by a contract. One question I do have, though, Ed, is you said it takes $600,000 a year to...
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly, and you put in 5.5, so it's roughly $2 million over?
Yeah.
Where did that money go? And one of the biggest problems that we had at the finance meeting, in my mind, was that bills weren't getting paid. So that $2 million could have helped pay the bills.
Yeah.
And granted, I know you're improving and you're doing this thing now at Stony Creek, but
that was a rough year. So a lot of the money was spent in the first couple of years. There was a lot of it you can't see. It's in the ground. It's ditching and culvert work. One of the biggest problems that the railroad had, and I know you know this before we came along, was that brush would come down in the winter rains and plug the culvert up, and everybody was very concerned that we were going to have major washouts along the line, because then when water comes down, it can't flow through the culvert, and so it blows the track out. And there were some washouts before we came along. We've worked really hard to clear out all of the culverts, and also down on the Corinth end of the line, there's a big swamp, bunch of beaver dams. Had to reroute all the water down there. I mean, that's in addition to what it takes to maintain and upgrade the crossing signals, what it takes to put in ties and change defective rails. And we also ended up rebuilding virtually all the tracks in the Saratoga station, because the station tracks had been basically out of use for years. When Amtrak comes into Saratoga Springs, they come in on either the main line or on the first track over, the controlled siding, and the tracks over closer to the station were not safe at all. So we rebuilt those tracks at 100% our cost on that. So those are some of the things that we've done. I mean, I could probably come up with more specific numbers if you guys wanted to see them, but it's just not. I mean, maintaining highways is not cheap. Maintaining railroad is not cheap either.
No, and for a business to be successful, you do have to reinvest money. So, if he just left the tracks alone, where would we be now? I think moving forward, we need to abide by the contract. We need to have them try to find sources of revenue. And unfortunately, that is with storage cars. So I will be in favor of this.
Okay, is there any other supervisors? Were you raising your hand?
And you'll bear with me. I'm Dan Gerard. I represent Glens Falls. To get into the unique area I have, where we have anhydrous ammonia and chlorine coming to provide chemicals to a paper plant that produces the best paper in the world. It also takes away Portland cement, which is a foundation builder for our country, and strengthen plastic packages that makes the famous noodles that we all throw in. And we have a dead end in our district that makes our zoning convoluted and quite interesting. And the district. So growing up with rail cars, etc., they've done something interesting. It's a little bit of the background of myself as a retired firefighter, so I dealt with hazardous materials, and I know we're all concerned with bringing hazards into the Adirondack Park, but I would suggest that we have I-87 that has many chemicals that travel every day that are just off maybe half a mile and back of us here. You know, that was man-made, but they're certainly a substitution for the rail competition. So we have those chemicals and employment in the Adirondack Park traveling through, providing employment, etc., and all the diversity that we need human beings to survive and go forward. I guess the rub here is that we've been trying to take a track that's minimal. We bought some. We're trying to get some sort of value out of it. Certainly, the effort's been admirable, but it's difficult.
It's difficult.
We said that freight is needed for revenue, etc. Because the option is that we have to haul. We don't have a contract with you. We own it. What we do is there's one bridge that might fall out. What said. We're having trouble funding a functional airport for $6,700 a year. Can you imagine what now what we do with railroads? So we have you that is doing that, is putting money in, etc. And you've been unsuccessful with saws, paling, trying to haul out. So you bring this forward. I guess what we're seeing is if we become a parking lot, what's in it for us? You know, you make your money, you keep the tracks up, but we're a tourism industry, we're a park, and we're a park community park. Is that going to end your effort to facilitate the tourism part that we feel beneficial?
Yeah,
Correct.
it's a good question.
About the trails, and biking, etc. And certainly that's nothing that's going to happen overnight, but certainly would take quite a commitment to the town.
No.
But I guess my question is that leading into this, are we just providing a parking lot? Is this the end of it? You make your money, we get our rail kept up, but what does it really do for us and our tourism? I guess that's the rub with it. We have a contract, I agree with that. I agree with Matt. I'm not looking, and I know what rails do for my district, the employment value that it brings there, and the dangers, the anhydrous ammonia and fertilizers, what blows up buildings, and so just to discuss the volatility of that down at Primes every day with the chlorine and oxidizers. And I have a grandson that goes to St. Mary's School that's 3 blocks away, so there's a lot of risk and environmental issues, etc. But it's part of our fabric and our country and what we do. And I guess my point is, what is the future as far as the presentation of this parking lot?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we came here for the tourism. I mean, and we've put together, as I said, one of the finest trains in North America. It's consistently rated at the top, and we have some fantastic, beautiful dome cars that people can see the Hudson from the train very well, and people love riding our train. The feedback is very positive, and we knew that it was going to take a while to develop freight. It's taking longer. I don't really feel like, I mean, we need to continue developing the tourism side of it too, and we've worked with Wayne and we've worked with Saratoga County on tourism, but it's been hard because the challenge is there are so many things to do with tourism dollars in this part of the world, and when we started, the whole idea was Lake George is doing pretty well. Let's draw people over to the western side of the county. And we worked with North Creek, we worked with Hadley and Thurman, and Corinth is still in the process of building their station, which Dick Lucia tells me will be done next year. So we know that there's still a lot of work to be done in developing tourism. And so the way I look at the parking lot, as you put it, is that it is the thing that buys all of us the time to see that development succeed. In order for the tourism part of it to succeed, it does take time, and it is taking longer than any of us thought for it to work. And we want it to work. We think that it's the right thing. We think that the asset is a beautiful asset. We think that the train ride is one of the best, and we believe that over the next few years, with the financial support from the storage, we'll have the freedom to continue working with Warren County and the town of Corinth to complete the development of tourism so that the railroad can stand on its own 2 feet and be sustainable with or without freight traffic.
Is there, or do you know in your knowledge of the railroad system, has there ever been a combination where in this tourist geographic where the bike trails come into play alongside the railroad? Is that something that...
I have 2 railroads in England where I built bike trails alongside the railroad.
Is that something that, futuristically you could sit down with us? Or that
Sure.
We need some...
I think I may have even talked about this a little bit at a previous meeting, but yeah, absolutely. Rail with trail is actually in a lot of ways easier to do from a regulatory point of view than abandoning the railroad and putting in a trail. And one of the things that rail with trail does is it provides an additional element of safety for people that are using a trail, because when you're out in the middle of nowhere on a trail and you get hurt and an emergency vehicle can't get down the trail to get to you, you're in trouble. And there are a couple of trails in Wisconsin that were former railroad trails. One of them goes through a beautiful tunnel where somebody actually died out there because it was a very lonely trail and nobody found them, couldn't get out. But if it's rail with trail and a train or a high rail truck comes by and somebody's hurt, they can be gotten out a lot quicker. So rail with trail can be a lot safer than trail without rail. Peter?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for coming. I think you need to gain a couple of pounds. Okay?
You know, I'm on the Justin Gagnon diet, and when he gains some, I'll gain some.
Okay. I represent the city of Glens Falls, so information is due to me. And I don't feel comfortable making a decision. Would you be opposed to getting some input, some information from the state of New York, DEC, from the APA, in terms of giving these folks a reasonable format and timeline to come up with a recommendation so that we as elected officials would have an opportunity to listen to their input, their experience, and try to make an intelligent decision.
So I guess what you're asking, is there some kind of a process that you're asking me?
I'm just asking that we as a board have, I don't believe, have reached out to the state of New York DEC or to the Adirondack Park Agency.
Or to your other partner?
Yeah.
I think it would be worthwhile for you guys to have a meeting with your other partner and talk about it. I'm talking about...
Sure. And
So I would be happy to go through any process in which, we explain what we're doing and why, and if somebody wants to take a view of it, be happy to do that. But I guess the question I would have is, is this for me or for you? Yeah, so I would do that for you. Yeah, I'd be happy to meet. Yeah, right. I'd be happy to meet with those agencies and have any discussion that anybody wants to have. Absolutely.
Chairman Conover?
liability of this contract is raised, my recommendation is that well, that any discussions going regarding the contract take place in this that out there. As this comment was made, that should you cease being the operator of the railroad, that you
Dennis? Go ahead, Chairman.
can't hesitate long, I know. Just one other thing, we just speak for the record, it's your company's position that that any income associated with this rental arrangement falls under the constitution of our agreement. And I just before you answer that, my understanding is that there may be a receipt of a communique from your attorney relative to this response to questions posed by them.
Yeah, so that's a contract question. It certainly seems like it is, but I don't want to commit to that one without looking at the contract and see what it says.
The record is, and should you agree with your attorney that it does apply to the attorney of Memorial Executive as well?
Of course. Of course. And so, in other places, I think in Mississippi last year, we earned close to $3 million. So 6% of that would be a real number.
Go ahead. Green light's on.
One of the frustrating things we seem to do is we're really good at making emotional decisions and negligent about potential losses. I think we have that situation here. If we continue to interfere with the election, we'll leave us up to another loss. I believe that in the long run, the world is clear. I would suggest that we compromise, table this resolution, be good partners, and remain silent.
We can't do that in this committee, though. This is the DPW. That resolution came out of finance. So, it has to be done. Okay. I'm just letting you know. Is there any other supervisors that would like to speak? Or, okay, Supervisor Strout?
Well, I'm not clear until I get all the facts in front of me as to where I should go on this. I mean, my concerns is I'm writing them down and thinking out loud. And I heard one description of some car storage up north in a northern county that went mile after mile after mile, linked together. So my immediate thought is a barricade like that, a wall, in essence, how is that going to impact wildlife migration? I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, so we don't do it that way. We don't go mile after mile after mile without a break. We've been doing this for a long time. I did my first car storage deal in 1980, you know, we've really worked on. There's a number of reasons that you have breaks. Sometimes you have breaks for bridges because the bridges have walkways on them and they're designed for pedestrians to use them, but if they can't cross the tracks at either end of the bridge to get to the walkway, they can't use it. We do breaks for wildlife, and we usually consult with the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, or the local agency on where the breaks ought to be. So, you know, we're not going to go miles and miles without a break.
All right, well, I'd be more comfortable if there was an environmental review, like a secret review, that kind of gave you how often those breaks should be to meet, wildlife migrations of that particular area. So,
Well, at this point, with 100 cars committed, we're not in that territory, but we would be happy to, if we get to the point where we're going to have a lot of cars, we'll do that, for sure.
well, okay. So,
And yes, as Mr. Conover said, I would be willing to memorialize that.
well, the other concern I have too, because I deal with zombie properties in the town of Kingsbury, and I'm sure all the supervisors do in their towns. And when a firm goes bankrupt and you have a piece of property, there's almost nothing we can do to remedy the situation. So, I mean, I'd hate to see the day when a railroad, or the segment of the railroad corporation that has control of this storage area, the house area, went bankrupt, and the cars sit there. I'd like to have some kind of legal remedy for us to bypass, act on that kind of a situation.
Well, there is actually a remedy for that in the federal law, because when a railroad company goes bankrupt, the U.S. Department of Transportation appoints a trustee to wind up the affairs or to sell the railroad or to get it leased to somebody else, and that trustee stays in place until all of that is done, including the resolution of any storage contracts.
Well, sometimes life isn't always that clear. I mean, with properties where the owner goes bankrupt and the bank doesn't want to take possession and the legal world doesn't have any solutions either, that's why we end up in zombie land.
Yeah,
because it's neither here nor there, it's neither life or death, it's in a zone where we can't do much of it about.
Yeah, that has, in 175 years of railroading, that's never happened. And it hasn't happened because originally the railroads came under English common law. They were common carriers, and so the federal regulation that was established to deal with railroads was set up to make sure that the interest of the commoners was protected. And so there have been maybe a dozen or 15 railroad bankruptcies during the time that I've been working for the railroad. Every one of them had a trustee appointed. Every one of them had a complete resolution. There was the most recent one near here was the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic, and that trustee successfully sold the railroad, and it's continuing to operate today, and the trustee's work is done. But that's the most recent one where a trustee was appointed. In every case of a railroad bankruptcy, the U.S. DOT appoints a trustee. That's the law.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Ron?
What is the pleasure of the chairman of the DPW today for today's meeting? Do you want a resolution?
We have a resolution that came out of finance. I don't think we really want to.
What did that resolution say?
It opposed the tanker cars being stored.
Okay. So we have a resolution that it was presented to finance that says we are opposed to the storage of cars.
Yes.
Now, is it the will of the board to change that? Or, I mean, where are we going? What's the direction?
I don't think we've talked about that. I think this meeting was to hear from Ed Ellis, concerning these tanker cars and what his plans were.
So does that resolution stand then, and will it be presented?
It is standing at this moment. It's standing, and
it'll be presented then at the county board meeting?
Yeah. At that time, it could be take any number of paths.
Thank you.
Claudia?
I would like to hear from the public, too. We have a good turnout.
I'm gonna.
Thank you.
That's right after the supervisors. Dennis? Okay. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to thank Mr. Ellis for coming to an agreement with the Stony Creek Ranch Resort. And, thank you very much for investing in our asset.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I hope both of you do very well.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Secondly, I hear a lot of talk about the Adirondacks and the Adirondack Park, and it is an Adirondack Park, but we need to remember that there's a lot of private property in the Adirondack Park, and you know, some of those people would like to make a living and not have to pay through the nose for taxes. And I believe that this revenue will help with our taxes and help maintain our asset. So, you know, well, it's all, we want to protect the Adirondacks, let's not forget the private property in there, and this is private property to begin with. And we seem to be always driving everything but tourism out of the Adirondacks. That seems to be where the state's going and where the people are going. But, you know, people need to make a living, and I don't really think tourism quite does that for everybody. So, that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Frank. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had asked for Mary and or Brian to weigh in on this before we hear from the public, so maybe some of the answers will be addressed, or the questions will be addressed.
That should be probably an executive session. So, you want to have executive session before the public comment?
I will move to go into an executive session.
I think we should have the
I
public
move
comment
not to.
first.
Let's have the public comment first.
Yeah.
It's been a long...
These people have been waiting for a couple hours. Let's give them the opportunity to discuss the feedback. I'm not for this.
She can... I'll let Mary speak. She's...
I can address the factual questions of the contract. I'd
That might be
rather not
helpful.
go into the liability aspect the public. But I think they're
Mary, can you turn the microphone, please? Thank you.
getting used to this. I think your question was, what does the contract currently allow? Was that your question?
Correct.
So currently the licensing agreement allows them to move trains and supplies over the county and town railroad. The only prohibition in the contract that would relate to this is if there was hazardous material in them. So that's currently how the contract is written. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, if we're looking to break that contract by not allowing them to store cars in there, what happens?
The contract is silent as to storage of cars on non-county owned property. So if Saratoga Railroad was going to store the cars on county property, that would be prohibited by the contract. But it's my understanding that the cars won't be stored on county property, and the contract is silent as to that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing further from the supervisors, I'll open it up to the public. Anybody would like to speak? State your name and...
Thank you. My name is Steve McNally. I'm the town supervisor of Minerva, New York, in the proposed location for the storage of these cars. We are neighbors to Warren County on one side of our town, and I'm in favor of the railroad succeeding, but not to the expense of the Adirondack Park. Every day I've been bombarded with questions on the storage of these cars. If these are stored on that rail bed, that makes what our envision of the railroad was to us when they proposed coming in, is they were going to actually haul aggregate out of to Hawes. Once this is enacted, there will be no aggregates hauled out of to Hawes. The board of Essex County opposes this storage of rail cars. I can stand here and speak all day long about some of the bad situations that can happen. One, you have to cast across a trestle on the Hudson River to get into this area. What happens when that trestle becomes non-passable? What are we going to do with the 2,000 cars there? We try to keep our town nice. We have zoning laws, we have junk storage laws, we have farm animal laws. Everyone in the town, you know, we work to keep our town nice. And the people of town, they're aware of the railroad. They're railroad with their financial conditions that's posted in the Post-Star. They're also concerned, every day we see pictures in publications of rail cars with graffiti written all over them. Why are the people opposed to these rail car stores? Because that is what they envision when they hear about this. So I'm just saying that we're opposed to this. I don't think it's what the Adirondack Park is about. I see no good coming out of it except for some revenue for the railroad. If I had a business plan in front of the county, would I rely on something storing cars? I think the county board should really look at the next contract that's in the contract, because there's no good options here. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter Bauer with Protect the Adirondacks. And thank you for this opportunity. It's been a while since I've talked to this board. Many of you I worked with on the Westbrook project on an invasive species in Lake George, which were very successful. And so it's good to be back here. We've heard about 20,000, potentially 20,000 cars on 20 miles of track north of North River, along the Hudson, along the Boreas River, along the Hudson again, going up to the Tahowas Mines. I agree with a lot of the comments that were raised by the supervisors about the aesthetic impacts, about this runs counter to what the Adirondack Park is all about, the concerns about tourism and about the park. I think you also need to get some hard answers, some hard legal answers. I know Dennis from the Dickinson Law Firm gave us some free legal advice, but I think that we really need to go to the Adirondack Park Agency and the Department of Environmental Conservation to work with your attorney to really get some hard answers. We think in our preliminary legal investigation with several attorneys who have been looking at this for us, that there are big issues once a railroad stops operating as a railroad, is used as storage. The terms change. We think there are issues with the Adirondack Park Agency, with the Wild and Scenic and Recreational Rivers Act. This railroad is in the corridor on the Hudson River and on the Boreas River, designated rivers in both those areas. We think under the Adirondack Park Agency Act, new commercial use. We think there are issues having to do with storage of their junkyards prohibitions in resource management areas and auto storage and resource management areas in the park. Part of this line goes through those areas. Then there's a whole host of forest preserve issues. A big chunk of this line is in the forest preserve. It's in the Vanderwacker Mountain Wild Forest area and its newly purchased lands all along the Hudson, along the Tahowas Road. Again, there's Rivers Act issues there. There's also issues about reversion. If it ceases, the land in Hamilton and Essex County, if it ceases to operate as a railroad, it reverts back to the landowners. One of the main landowners is the state of New York. That land, much of it was forest preserve when the line was originally built during World War II. That would revert back to the state. We think that there are some significant issues about reversion if this line stops operating as a railroad and is just used as a storage facility. So we think those are big questions that need to be looked at. And before you get into issues like compensation, which certainly seems like a red herring, the contract has to comply with the law. What the operators do on this rail line has to comply with the law. And so we'd encourage you to get those questions answered as quickly as possible. We know there's someone here from the DEC. I don't see anyone here from the Adirondack Park Agency, but I think when the full county board meets, you should ask those agencies to come in. Having done a legal review, send them questions in advance, all of you, so that we can get some good answers about what the legal issues are. So thank you very much.
This woman here.
Hello. Hi, my name is Gay Byrne. I live in Garnet Hill off of 13th Lake Road in North River. And I'm here because I used to live in New Jersey in a community that was bisected by a rail line. And we had consistent problems with access to emergency services and access to schools and access to roads when the trains were going through the town. Long trains create huge bottlenecks. And if there were ever to be a problem with a rail, with a grade crossing, that will create a bottleneck that will completely bisect the northwest Warren County, and it'll prevent all movement between the eastern side of New York and the western side of the Adirondack Mountains. These are not insignificant problems. People will not be able to get to jobs. They won't be able to get to schools. They won't be able to get to emergency services and back and forth. So I urge you to consider the fact that you might not see the cars once they're in storage, but you will see them as they move back and forth to storage. And if there's going to be 2,000 cars up there and 37 different customers, I can assure you that there's going to be movement back and forth frequently. I don't want any ill will towards a business that needs to operate, but it seems to me that if we're not getting jobs out of this, and it doesn't strike me that there's going to be any jobs operating a parking lot, that we should be looking towards protecting the Adirondacks, making sure people can transit the area easily. Obviously, a tourist train that runs once or twice a day with 2 or 3 cars is not creating a big bottleneck. But if you take a 50 or 100 car line of trains, you're going to have bottlenecks even when the trains are operating correctly. If there's a problem, you'll have a very large problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to the committee. I'm Neil Woodworth. I'm the legal counsel and executive director of the Adirondack Mountain Club. And we did a lot of research as to the original arrangement for this 30 miles to cross Forest Preserve in Essex County. And the reality was that it was a wartime measure. It was intended to facilitate the movement of titanium ore during World War II and later during the Korean War. But essentially the condemnation of the Forest Preserve that this railroad ran over was intended as a temporary easement. The railroad, in my opinion, does not own a fee interest. It owns an easement subject to a reversionary interest, and in my mind, when you go back to the original purposes for that condemnation, remember Article 14 is part of our state constitution, and it trumps everything else. And I would argue that it trumps the federal laws when we don't have an operating railroad. If this railroad isn't operative because 2,000 cars are parked along it, and you can't move anything out of the Tahawas mine, in my mind, it goes all the way back to the original condemnation of that easement, and we're basically in a situation where it goes back to the Forest Preserve, at least that 30 miles north of North Creek. I also think that some of the issues that Peter Bauer raised are also concerns for us. The fact that it's a new use in a wild, scenic, and recreational river corridor. It's a new business use in an area which has not been passed on by the Adirondack Park Agency. And in my mind, the railroad just does not get a free pass on those issues. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Mark Westcott, town of Queensbury. I did a little bit of looking around, a little research before coming this morning, not as much as I would have liked, but this was very informative. I'd like to thank Mr. Ellis, who I understand had to step out, but his representatives he could pass on. Thank him for coming to this meeting, addressing this committee and the public before moving forward. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for not going into executive session.
You're welcome.
So we could talk. Those of us that have to work today are taking time off. One of the articles was from the Wall Street Journal, which is friendly to business. And the headline was, "Miles of idled boxcars leave town singing the freight train blues." There's stories all over this country of communities, municipalities like Warren County that have approved these deals or supported them. Sounds like we don't really have to approve it. And these cars sit there and they sit there and they sit there. We've all seen the eyesores. I kind of had to chuckle a little bit sarcastically when the out of sight, out of mind rationale was used. Just because we may not be driving by them on the highway, it doesn't mean they're not there. So I think that logic doesn't apply. They are there. I'm sympathetic to the business plan not working out the way that it was envisioned and the need to raise revenues. It's unfortunate that the contract is allowing them to do this, but that's the case, and I don't think anybody's saying we're going to break the contract. We're just talking about a resolution that says we don't agree with this as a community, and I don't agree with this. I think the points have been made very clear that this is a concern from a number of fronts, and I just wanted to go on record saying I do not approve of this taking place in the Adirondack Park. Thank you.
Thank you. The resolution?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. I just have to say that, you know, our board, you know, doesn't have anything to say because they have a legal right to go across our tracks, so that was in our position. But these other comments are my personal feelings. I worked with Mr. Merlino and Wayne Lamothe for years. Took a lot of heart and soul to get the railroad to come through here to partner with Warren County. We were really pleased to be able to do that. And we had all the envisions of Mr. Ellis's dreams and our dreams too. But I don't feel that we should be able to give up on his making some money that's going to come back to us. Like he said, we've been a couple of years now trying to get our station up. We're digging the ground. We're ready to get the power in, put up the first phase, hopefully this fall, and the station next year. And I hate to see a station to nowhere. As far as the tourism, and I don't mean anything cynical or anything, but seeing the railroad cars to me isn't as big a problem for tourists as having to shut down $1 Million Beach. You know, people were looking for a place to go, and Mr. Dixon, don't take me wrong. I'm just saying that's, people say, you know, why do I want to go? So I personally am in favor of letting the storage happen, and that's my opinion, not the board's. Thank you.
Thank you. Travis?
Travis Whitehead, Queensbury. The point was made earlier that we have a contract with Mr. Ellis. Point was also made that payments were late, but they were made. There are other things, though, in that contract that said things like the snow train was supposed to be run. You can't unring that bell. There were no snow trains run. We did not allow snowmobiles to use that area at all last year because it wasn't said early enough that there wasn't going to be a snow train. These are things that hurt us. We did get a report recently that shows what the revenue has been, the passengers to date for 2017, and I got that recently from the treasurer, and they've served a total of less than 800 passengers since January 1st, 2017. That's up through September 1st. That's not a very big number. The total revenue that they brought in for the county, less than $4,500. So, you know, you've got to wonder about whether this is really helping us or not. As far as being a good partner or not, think about some of their other partners. One of the reasons why this Christmas train is not called the Polar Express is that he previously partnered with Rail Events, a company that owns and licenses that name, Polar Express. They sued them for $3 million, saying that they owe them $3 million in royalties that were never paid. I don't know how that has been resolved, but it's just not a good indication that these people are good partners with all of their other partners. Lastly, I'd just like to say that
like Mark, this contract says nothing about what you may or may not say about the opinions of your constituents. I think you will know that the opinions of your constituents are that they don't like the idea of trains up in the Adirondack Park, and if you were to go ahead and put that out as a resolution, just like you put out a resolution saying that you didn't particularly care for the SAFE Act, things like that, it's just a statement. And I don't see what it has anything, there's nothing in the contract that says you cannot put out a resolution. So I think that is a red herring, when you start saying, you can't do this, there are contractual issues. I don't believe so. And, when you do go into executive session, hopefully, you can discuss some of these things. Thank you. Thank you. Brad?
Fred Austin, used to run the DPW, was involved in the original purchase of the railroad and everything. Something that never seems to get mentioned, and it should be mentioned again. There is, in Taos, 2 mountains of aggregate. There is, on Long Island, no aggregates. I know they've been working, trying to figure out a way to get the aggregates by train down to Long Island. And they're running into problems. Nothing up here, that's fine. They're ready to go. It has to do with getting into another railroad system and then getting it over, possibly the Port of Albany, I'm not really sure, to get it onto barges to go down the Hudson to Long Island. And Long Island is a big winner of a drop down in aggregate prices. Everything you see built on Long Island gets trucked in by truck. That's up there. That's the main reason way back when Essex County IDA went in and bought the track to save it. Because someday, somehow, if all goes as those people hoped, you've got a huge piece of economic thing going on here. It's going to take some doing down south to get it to where they can get it onto the barges. And last comment would be our last dealings with the APA were when they were going to film the Last of the Mohegans, Daniel Day-Lewis movie, and they came up to the fort and we gave them a set of plans of the original fort, because we're built exactly like it on this thing. Told them to do whatever we could, just let us know. He said, you've got to go start with the APA. So they thanked us and left. We found out afterwards they went up to the APA and told them they want to go into the woods with a landowner, hire all local people, cut an area out, build a log fort, enough for the filming, film it, burn it down, being filmed that, clean everything up and leave with all local labor. So they went up and explained that, and the APA representative they talked to said, okay, that's just what we like, local jobs, this is wonderful, you're going to clean it up, well, nobody will ever know they were there, this is great, we'll get you a permit. And he said, well, without a doubt, how long will it take? He said, we're going to fast track it, you'll get the permit in 6 months. 2 weeks later, look at the movie, you'll see the local flowers down there. 2 weeks later, they were building the fort in Carolina. 0 jobs.
Sure.
Peter Horvath in North River, so I see this most every day. And I do want to say that there's a couple things I wish that could be looked at the contract when you go into executive session. It seems like there's been numerous breaches in terms of what I perceived that they were going to deliver to North Creek in terms of the snow train, et cetera, but more so, most every day I drive down to North Creek, my metropolis, and see what I envision as their goodwill, and it's train cars along, blocking the view from the Hudson that they have acknowledged are their responsibility, covered with graffiti. If that's how they treat train cars that you see every day I really worry about the type of care they'll make on train cars that they say we won't see. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Okay. Somebody like to make a motion to go into executive session, like to discuss contractual obligations?
Well, you could either do it as discussions regarding proposed pending or current litigation, or you could do to discuss the performance of a contract.
Okay. We do. Wait a second. Gene coming back?
His stuff is still here.
Okay, we have 5. Go into executive session to discuss
I'll second it, not
performance of a particular contract or contract.
Yeah, he should.
Ron. Yeah. He's not on. Ron, you're not on the committee.
Yeah, I know.
Need another second. I guess we can't.
What's that?
Hold on one second. I got everybody. We got to figure out who the second is.
Did you need a second?
Okay. So.
Do we have enough
Yeah.
people that voted yes, though?
Huh? But before we do, I need to find out.
Now you have to have a vote that all 5 people say yes.
Okay. So we're going to have a vote and all, we need all yeses. If we're going to go into executive session, we need 5 votes. Show of hands.
You don't want to go into?
Okay. Motion failed.
Well, it's going to come before the board next Friday.
The resolution is in our committee. We can't.
I know that, I want this committee to make a resolution and inquire on this. And I vote for it and I vote against it. You made me lose.
I don't think there was a vote today anyway.
Do we need duct tape?
Yeah. I don't,
I'll get you that girl, Benny.
I don't think there was a resolution to vote on today anyway. Yeah.
He can make a motion.
You want to make a resolution?
He wants to make a motion. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll make a motion we adjourn.
Seconded by Supervisor Sokol. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Nothing.